Hi guys, so today we're going to discuss why Spring configuration property binding sucks and how it failed to secure our data and make it immutable. So let's get started. If you can remember, yesterday I was able to publish my video tutorial regarding the Spring configuration property, but there are issues regarding the property binding using add configuration properties. For starters, we understood that we need to add fields and then getters and setters. That's right, you can hear it, setters. Now the problems with setters is that everyone in our application that have an access to that object or being, say like dbconfig, will be able to change the values of the properties during runtime. For example, I have a dbconfig class that is bound to my application properties, and I am only using add configuration properties at this time. So going back in our main class, which is the configuration property application, and as you can see, I was able to print my dbconfig values using command line runner. But then during runtime, since I can access my setters and getters, that would mean that I can change the values, right, using the setters method. So first, let's try to build the project and run it if it's actually working before we do further changes. So let's click on this, then let's wait until the program finishes. So okay, it actually builds and the boot run, the Spring finished successfully. Now let's do some code changes. You see, what we wanted to do is to at least access our getters and change our property values. See, I set the username from our application properties and the value is user1. But what if during runtime we can actually change those values? Let's do that in here. Okay, that hold on, set username. This is bad. Okay, and then let's print the username again. So how do we do that? Username. Let's just copy this code and paste it in here. We're good. Edited. Then let's run the application and see it's actually changed. As you can see, the original value of our username is user1. But then during runtime, since I have an access to my setters, I have access to dbconfig and should be able to change the values using the setter method. As you can see, set username. I was able to change the value of the username to this one. See, if you ask me why it is actually bad, it's because this is actually properties we're talking about. We want to load properties once during the Spring startup, and it is supposed to be immutable. It means that once the properties are loaded, no one should be able to change it during runtime. Good news is that in our latest Spring Boot version 2.3.x, constructor binding is introduced. It means that in this case, we will be able to construct or create an instance of our dbconfig without exposing or making a setter methods anymore. It means our dbconfig configuration classes is already immutable. Okay, so since we are actually using the latest Spring Boot version already, so what are the annotation we need to convert this mutable dbconfig class to an immutable one? We should use at constructor binding annotation, and then remove all of our setter methods, right? And just leave our getters. So what we're gonna do is that let's just remove everything and generate getters only. So just click on generate getters and setters and select getters and then generate. Okay, so as the annotation name suggests, constructor binding, it means we also need to create our own constructor, and the constructor needs to have argument parameter. So how to do that? So let's generate constructor using fields and just add all the class fields as one of your constructor parameters. So select all and then generate. Alright, so now we're good. So let's try to build our program and see if it's printing the values correctly. There seems to be a problem in here, so let's try to understand. Alright, this means that since we were able to remove our setters, it means that we need to remove this line of code in here. That's right. So let's remove that. Remove this one. Let's remove that. Okay, then let's run our program. Alright, so we were able to execute and run our Spring application and it actually finished successfully. Now let's try to inspect if it's actually building and if it actually bind the correct properties to our dbconfig class. So for example, I want to check if the username is correct, user1, and the password is pass. Is it the same with the application.properties? That's correct. But then how about our list others? As you can see, I have a default value in here. So whenever the others doesn't have any bound properties to it from the application.properties, it will use the default one, which is the test1 and test2. And as you can see here in the console, it is actually using the default value. So it's telling us that the others field doesn't have any properties bound to it. But is it that true? So let's check in our application.properties. So okay, as you can see, db.others actually does have a bound properties to it. But then why is it using the default value from our @value annotation? So what happened is that aside from the constructor binding annotation, we also need to use the @default value annotation in favor of instead of using the @value annotation instead. So that's one of the breaking changes that I observed, and it forces us to update our code base and then change the @value annotation to default value. And we can't use this annotation in field level. It has to be an argument level. So what it means is that we need to remove this line of code and move it in our argument parameter, which is the list. And then, as you can see, this one accepts as an array of string. So we also need to change our argument value to something like this. We need to pass an array of string here. Okay, so now let's check, see if it's working now. Execute boot run, and then let's wait until it's done and see if it's printing the correct values. So you should be able to see db1, db2 values in here. Alright, so now it's a success. Using the @default value resolves the issue. But then it is actually a breaking changes because we are forced to update our code base from using @value annotation to @default value annotation. But if you ask me, that is actually totally fine for me. A trade-off from a mutable property class to an immutable property class. So if I have to just update my code base to change the at value annotation to a default value annotation, then that is totally fine for me. I will have my dbconfig property classes immutable, and that is much way better. So that's all for today's tutorials. Hit like button and subscribe button. Thank you.